EDS1 moss ivy has been created very much as a result of this extraordinary research that we did in Gunung Mulu and the mosses that we worked with. There is a picture of the river that we flew over, and it's quite interesting because we've always said that rivers, this sort of red rivers, were equatable to the circulatory system, and never more so than when you look down and see these massive mud-strewn rivers all around the Far East and India. But it's a rather interesting formula, and if you look at the top, it says EDS1 moss ivy, equatable to HARP-1. Now, it's very, very interesting because when we are dealing with DNA mitral, we are frequently involved with one very powerful formula, and that is HARP-1. So we also use EDS1 moss ivy for the very same support, certainly for the mitral valve and certainly for DNA mitral. So EDS1 moss ivy is an extremely powerful combination of essences made from these primary jungle mosses and ancient forests of the lycopod ferns in Barbados, which is literally on the other side of the world. And intriguingly enough, the homeopathic word lycopodium, the homeopathic remedy, frankly speaking, is for pneumonia. And again, lycopod, these extraordinary ferns, are some of the most ancient plants on the planet. And intriguingly enough, there are fossils all over the place, all around Malaysia and in the jungles, and particularly in Barbados, which were fossils of lycopod, which are millions and millions of years old. And it's so fascinating that, like these amazing plants, these ancient plants, and the lichens as well, we all know very clearly about the power of the lichen and the spiritual powerful aspect of the lichen. But then there's one beautiful flower essence, which is called ivy blossom, ivy flower. And that is something which we've always used to heal the heart and heal emotional tragedies. And there isn't any doubt at all that the tragic what's happening in the world today is extraordinarily emotional and having a terrible impact on the world in many, many ways. So we're going to look at this concept of the megakaryocytes. The interesting thing is that the megakaryocytes and the moss vibrate on this extraordinary energy of green. We know that green is the color of life, lifeblood, and we know that green is the color of love. It's the color of the heart, and it's the color of the lungs. The immune system is utterly controlled by emotions, and there isn't absolutely, well, it's completely impossible to contest the fact that when we are heartbroken, that opens up the doorway to very serious immune system breakdown. Our thymus gland vibrates on the frequency of green as well, the thymus gland that controls our immune system. And so spiritual tragedies, emotional disturbances often seriously lead to these heartbreaking breakdown of our immune system. And hence we have one of our very important and very powerful heart power formulas, which is actually called heart power 4, emotional immunity. Bearing in mind that if we are emotional, the emotional journey is also the upper left quadrant of the heart, the mitral valve. And whilst EDS1 moss ivy is very supportive of the emotions that may affect the mucosa of the lung, this is also very, very important because the mucous membranes of the body are very much linked with the lymphatic system, and the mucous membranes are very, very emotional. The mucous membranes are found in the sinuses, the tonsils, the orifices, the ears, the mouth, the nose, the orifices of sexual, the colon, the uterus, the cervix, and of course the genitourinary tract as well. But also the mucosa are found in the dermis of the skin. So it is really, really interesting that the hollow organ of the heart is the small intestines. The small intestines meridian is the internal external skin. So megakaryocytes, we're going to talk a great deal about this extraordinary term, megakaryocytes. And again, I will take you back to an extraordinary experience and a dream that I had, which culminated in discovering lichens in Ipoh. And as we left, you know the story, many of you know the story, and it's available for those of you who don't. As we left the cave in Ipoh, we found the black lichen, and I was with the Dean of the Institute of Complementary Medicine, and he said, Diana, that is for megakaryocytes. And I never had any idea what that was about until much more recently, literally a couple of years ago, when suddenly it started to become obvious that if we were to heal people, we had to have a clear understanding of what the megakaryocytes were and how they work and their ability to heal us. Airborne viruses, airborne pollution. Of course, viruses are airborne. A majority of the viruses that we're seeing today are extremely concerning, and it is a very big worry that we are constantly under the duress of man-made viruses, which are being consistently created. I just want to relate the vibration of the megakaryocytes to our formulas. Megakaryocytes control blood cells. They are stem cells, and they are responsible for releasing one of the most important of the blood cells called blood platelets, or thrombocytes by another name. The vibration of blood platelets, I think you all know, is flour formula 4 and 18. We combine those two flour formulas, HF4, HF18. In Europe, we refer to them as flour formulas, FF. 4 and 18 to support blood platelets. But in order to support the megakaryocytes, we have to use the tree formula, Magnolia, which is Superfit 3. What was so extraordinary is that only recently, and this is really makes us all think a little bit about this experimental procedures that they're constantly throwing at us. We have to think that we know very, very little. We really don't understand the human body at all. It is utterly, utterly extraordinary. Very recently, researchers in America made the most extraordinary discovery. And they discovered that the lungs were like the jungle, well, exactly like the jungle. And the floor of the lungs was actually covered in a very extraordinary fretwork of blood cells or stem cells called megakaryocytes. And this extraordinary evidence revealing that the lungs don't just facilitate respiration, but quite obviously they are the main source of protecting us against airborne pollution. And so this amazing concept, whereas the lungs were just considered to be made up of the alveolar macrophage system to protect us from bacteria, the immune system, they then made this incredible discovery that we produce millions, if not billions, of red blood cells, blood platelets within the lungs to maintain the moss of the lungs and to keep it safe, to keep us safe, and to prevent toxins from crossing the lung barrier into the body. These extraordinary release of blood platelets, creating this clotting that staunches bleeding. I think one of the things that we are actually witnessing in modern society is this high level of bruising in the tissues, nosebleeds, children suffering with nosebleeds, particularly after having nasal spray. And of course, they're now looking at that in greater detail, and I'll talk about that in a minute. Another surprising finding was that the scientists also identified a previously unknown pool of stem cells in the lungs capable of restoring blood production. And when the stem cells of the bone marrow, previously thought to be the principal site of blood production, was impaired, that the lungs would take over and start to produce the blasts, so the megakaryocytes, the hemocytoblasts, etc., and a feedback mechanism into the bone marrow to heal it. And they discovered this extraordinary phenomena, or so they referred it to. But of course, it's been happening in our human bodies and in mammalian bodies for hundreds of millions of years. It's only a new discovery because scientists have actually suddenly stumbled across this awareness, which just goes to show how, you know, in this modern society, when we do so much to damage our lungs, that we've only just discovered how desperately important and how clever the human body is. And the way they discovered this was to tag with fluorescent lights transplanted megakaryocytes that they transplanted into the lungs of mice. And then, to their absolute astonishment, they found that these megakaryocytes were gravitating directly into the bone marrow and healing the bone marrow and enabling the bone marrow and to restore itself to actually produce new bone cells, bone marrow cells, and to also heal the blast. So, you know, the human body is superb. Now, we know something extraordinarily important. We know that by using vibrational medicine, we can tune the aberration of cells to stabilize and balance and to literally start to work correctly. We know that that's how our flower formulas work. But let's look again at the blood platelets, and again, flower formula 4 and flower formula 18. So if there is a problem with one of your patients and they have a difficulty with platelets, you know that you can help them with this combination of formulas. They're derived from bone marrow cells called the megakaryocytes. But it's now obvious that these megakaryocytes are also found in other parts of the body, other sites of the body. And my feeling is that although they've not done this research, it's perfectly obvious to me that the other areas of skin also have these megakaryocytes. And of course, the largest area that is alongside the lung and the hollow organ of the heart is, of course, the small intestines, where we also have the amazing connection between the walls of the small intestines and the villi, these extraordinary little fingers that are full of red blood. And this is where there is an exchange of nutrition. So we have these areas of energy exchange in the lungs and, of course, the small intestines, which have to be kept safe. So it really is a very, very interesting discovery. The fact is that blood platelets, as we know, are derived from these megakaryocytes, and they are huge. They produce the megakaryocytes, which are really quite large, and they starburst into billions and millions of these little platelets. Of course, you all know that one of the biggest problems with the so-called COVID is that people are clotting very badly. Whenever they do investigations, they're discovering massive blood clotting, not just in the lungs, but in the brain, in the heart, causing all sorts of serious, very serious health problems. What is so extraordinary is that, as we've already said, these megakaryocytes release blood platelets. But if you think about it, we already sort of knew this, because when we go back to the macrophage system, we know that the monoblasts in the bone marrow produce the monocytes that are carried by the blood to the sites around the organs, where in situ they produce the monocytes. And these are the macrophage of the alveolar of the lungs. So we also have not just the blood platelets in the lungs, but we have the alveolar macrophage system, which is also responsible for producing the white blood cells, the monocytes. They are macrophage and they eat up bacteria. So we have this extraordinary immune system, which is quite capable of working all by itself. As long as we live well, we eat well, we feed ourselves well, we enjoy our friends and our families, there is absolutely every opportunity for us to be healthy. It's so interesting, and I think you'll understand that the more we realize just how extraordinary vibrational medicine is in its gentleness and its power, the more we are in control and the less we need to be scared. what damages the megakaryocytes and the production of the red blood cells? Well, we know that airborne toxicity is vast all across the world. City pollution, airborne pollution in cities, petrochemicals. Now we've got something else that we're not really allowed to talk about, and it's called radiation. And again, there's a huge amount of silence over the possibility that high levels of radiation could harm humanity. We are faced with some pretty worrying situations in Jersey, and that my bees have behaved very, very strangely. Not just my bees, all the bees. And I'm really, really sad because the bees are dying all over the world, and certainly all over England. I've been told by friends in England who are beekeepers that their bees have died as well. And the first thing is that they started to behave very oddly. They started to swarm and swarm and swarm and become very disconnected. And then eventually they're just dying. And there's something going on that's very odd. The other thing is that we have plants here called hydrangeas, and they're rather beautiful. And they're pink and white, but they've all turned blue. Now, it's known in horticultural circles that if you want to turn your hydrangeas blue, you have to add copper to the soil. But something must be going on in the rain to produce this strange phenomenon, because I've got quite a lot of hydrangeas. I certainly haven't given them copper. So either it's in the rain or it's another interesting aspect to radiation. Again, another thing that is very strange is that if you sit in the sun, you start to, your skin prickles. It's almost as if you're standing by a microwave, which is really complicated. Nosebleeds are often the first sign of damage to megakaryocytes. So we've got a rather disturbing situation that possibly high levels of radioactivity may be causing damage to our megakaryocytes as well. Of course, dust, pollen, asbestos. We know that asbestotitis is the most terrifying illness, and that people who've been in contact with asbestos, maybe even 20, 30 years ago, often end up dying. And a lot of people have suddenly started to die of asbestos poisoning, where they've been in contact with asbestos probably about 30 years ago. So something may be compounding that and triggering it. We are very concerned about the procedure of nasal sprays. It is concerning for many reasons, and that is that we don't really know what is in the nasal sprays. And these are complicated situations. And as we well know, if you spray something into the nose, it is very close to the sinuses. In fact, it's immediately connected to the sinuses, and the sinuses are protectors of the brain. So this concept of nasal spray may be more dangerous than we realize. Then, of course, we have a known phenomena, and this is pharmaceutically known and pharmaceutically listed, that certain vaccinations will shed because they are live, attenuated, and they do shed. And it's listed in the scientific journals and the pharmaceutical pamphlets that some illnesses, some vaccines shed. And we know perfectly well that the flu vaccines shed. And then, of course, we've got infections around us, colds and flu, and of course, the famous SARS, and again, H1N1. There are other things that damage our megakaryocytes, and that, of course, is chemicals, bacteria, all the bacteria. And intriguingly enough, the research that I did before I came out to see you all in November 2019, where we were literally investigating how vaccines affected the megakaryocytes. And much to my great surprise and concern, I discovered that every single vaccine had an impact on the health of the megakaryocytes. Of course, the megakaryocytes are activated by operations, cuts, wounds, bruising, and of course, little boys tripping over, falling, bruising their knees, and they activate at nighttime through a very complex brain hormone pathway called serotonin fibrinogen. So we produce blood platelets whilst we're sleeping. And it's intriguing that often when you've been wounded, it's when you're sleeping that your body heals, because it is during sleep that the serotonin activates fibrinogen, which is the clotting relationship. It creates the wound, the scab. And again, what we are very concerned about is that the damage to megakaryocytes ultimately leads to very serious health problems. And of course, cancers and leukemias are on the increase, and all disease pathways, because they are so fundamentally and vitally important. So our lungs, incredibly important to keep them safe. And we do have a combination of extraordinary formulas called Flour Formula 10, Nicotiana, HF10, which of course is for breath of life. This is our flour formula for the breathing. And again, one of the things we didn't mention about damage to the lungs, which of course was smoking and vaping, which is very popular now. Nicotiana is the antidote to nicotine and supports people when they smoke. Superfit 5 Breathe, our beautiful green Deodar cedrus, wonderful tree of God, amazing fir cones that have the most beautiful scent. And when you smell the Deodar cedrus fir cone, it opens up the sinuses so that you can breathe. It's referred to as the tree of life, God's tree, Deodar, God, the tree of God, and is mentioned in Sanskrit texts as one of the most powerful healers on the planet. It's hardly surprising when we compare our special care formulas, and our main master, the olive love, is our master our master special care formula, which we give to all our special needs children. And whilst we're talking about all of this, I do have to tell you that the level of terrible damage to special needs children is so terrible. It's so aggressive. It's so frightening that nowadays, virtually, I'm sorry, Joan, I know you'll back me up on this one, but we're seeing now the ordinary average family, healthy, wealthy, with special needs children. And this problem has got worse and worse. And I have been extraordinarily busy throughout this whole process, working away with families. The letters are so harrowing. It breaks my heart. I see these pictures of these pretty little children and these agonizing letters saying, you know, I'm desperate. I don't know what to do. My baby was beautiful, chatting away, walking and vibrant. And then suddenly, you know, they're absent, they've gone. They don't face me, they don't look at me, they can't walk, they can't talk, they're dizzy, they fall over, they make funny sounds. They're in pain, and it's agonizing for a young family to suddenly realize that their child has lost to them. And yet we have the most incredible results. And you all know, of course, about the special care program, and we start with Olive Love. And intriguingly enough, a lot of that energy is directed towards scans and radiation that mothers are subjected to when the baby is in the womb. So Olive Love is an incredibly powerful formula, and it goes back and back and back in time to the depth of conception and possibly even further back. But then we have our heart power. And we go back to this extraordinary, powerful range of formulas. And our Heart Power 3, of course, is called Breathe Freely. Breathe Freely. This is for the pulmonary valve. It's for puberty. And this, again, is being called into more and more and more, because so many of our pubescent children are now going forward to have the procedure that causes damage to the RNA tricuspid. So let's look at the lung compared to the heart power formulas. If you superimpose our heart palm map on the lung, you know where the damage is. For example, if the damage is in the upper right lobe of the lung, then we know that that is tricuspid, RNA tricuspid. The lower lobe of the lung on the right, making space for the liver. It's quite interesting because that lower lobe is the equatable to the pulmonary. The upper left, of course, the upper lobe, and of course there are only two lobes on the left, making way for the heart that sits alongside the middle lobe of the right lung. So correlating with the middle lobe, very emotional. And so the upper left lobe of the lung correlating with DNA mitral. And then we have the lower left lobe, which correlates with the aortic. And there's a little something here that I want to talk to you all about, because there is a responsibility. If we are going to care for other people, we have to care for ourselves. We have to be utterly, utterly careful to ensure it is our absolute duty to be well. It is no good looking after other people if we are not well. We must be well. We have the wherewithal to be well because we have all our wonderful formulas. So do care for yourselves and do the massages that I've taught you. Do clear your sinuses, do clear your meninges. You must look after yourselves. Let's just move on to moss, this incredible moss and lycopodium, supporting the megakaryocytes and protecting the jungle floor. I think one of the things that was so beautiful about Gunung was this lovely, soft, damp moss that covered the floors of the jungle and protected the jungle, these amazing trees. Moss supports the alveolar macrophage. It protects the mucous membranes of the sinuses and the tonsils, the internal skin, not just of the lungs, but the small intestines, the external tissues of the dermis and the epidermis. And intriguingly enough, the homeopathic remedy, lycopodium, has been used for maybe hundreds of years for pneumonia, pneumococcus. And of course, pneumococcus is the bacteria that hurts the lungs. So now we're going to move on to the lichens. And again, I want to talk to you again about this concept of the spiritual and emotional aspect of our lives. The trauma of isolation is supported by lichen. What have we been doing? We've all been locked away. We've all been shut. We're not allowed to cuddle people. We're not allowed to touch. We're not allowed to kiss our grannies and our grandpas, or at least I am the granny. You know, it's quite diabolical, because the one thing that really thrills me throughout my life is being with my family, being with my babies, being with my friends, being in contact, you know, hugging, kissing, and being with people that we love. So to shut ourselves away and to be isolated is pretty cruel. We've always understood the power of the lichens. They are extraordinary, the wise old souls of the plant kingdom. They're ancient, sometimes thousands of years old. These extraordinary essences that we make from the fungi and the lichens are very sacred. We understand, don't we, that the silver thread of procreation, our ancestry, we come from the past, we come from the ancestry. And what I love about the power of the lichens is that it just takes us back in time to hundreds and thousands, maybe even millions of years behind us into the past, the silver thread of our ancestry that creates us, creates our RNA and our DNA. We also know that the RNA and the DNA lies in the house of the stars, and it's so extraordinary. The genome of humanity cannot be changed. It can only be destroyed. So introducing procedures that interfere with the RNA and the DNA, genetically modifying and interfering with this, will not create health. It can only create mutation, incredible disease, and incredible disharmony. and incredible, sadly, death, premature death. And I think it's irreversible. And I don't know whether it is or not. And one of the reasons why I'm researching and researching and researching is in an attempt to reverse this incredibly tragic destruction. Again, when we talk about RNA mitral and RNA tricuspid and DNA mitral, we are seriously looking at damage to this very, very complex issue. And yes, we have the power to go back in the past with some of these extraordinary essences. We have the power to mend the damage with the special care formulas. And hopefully we will create formulas that will have the power, but I'm working on it. And let's say that it is actually an ongoing situation because we're not sure. So the spiritual support of lichens, made up of 2 plants that represent a love affair, a marriage, a partnership, a relationship, all the things that matter in our lives, the love stories, the relationships, the love, it always comes back to love. And a partnership is the giving and the taking, the exquisite beauty of caring for people. And again, every relationship depends on this incredible flow of positive energy. And again, when we take, we give in a relationship that thrives. So the lichens, such ancient plants. And if you move on, you see the beautiful picture of the dolmens and the ancient lichens on these extraordinary stones that are centuries old, 6,000 years old. And the lichens are still alive. It's deeply spiritual and powerful. And of course, it is in our formula Moss Ivy. And then we move on to ivy flower, this exquisite little flower. It's the spiritual level is belief, faith, belief systems, the emotional, warm and loving, kind and special. A sense that we're never alone, a sense that we are loved and protected. And the extraordinary thing about the world, okay, there's a lot of tough stuff going on in the world, but correlative with that, we also have the beauty of the guardian angels always there. And yes, there is light. And what is so beautiful is the flowers and the plants around us offer us such a powerful level of redressing these imbalances. And that is something that we must not lose sight of. And there's something very interesting about this extraordinary flower essence, not a coincidence that it's needed here, because it's this loss of faith, not knowing who to turn to, not knowing who to believe in, not knowing where to go. Oh my God, it is so awful. The world is in such a mess. There's no faith, there's no hope. Absolutely not so. I do not believe that. I believe that we've been gifted and that we have a big, big responsibility. So ivy flower has a powerful place to play in this extraordinary, extraordinary formula. So I want to talk to you a little bit here about the correlation of these formulas and the hierarchy and the relationship with our other formulas. And again, DNA mitral, this EDS1 Moss Ivy for DNA mitral damage, incredibly, incredibly important. Together with Heart Power 1, peak vitality, Superfit 1, peak performance, FF11, Hawthorn, all for the heart, of course, Special Care, Oak Care, which is interesting, all for the heart. But again, this is not just to protect DNA mitral damage, it's to protect all of us from what is going on in the environment. And it is my suggestion that every single one of us has this formula at least once a day, alongside protection for emotional issues, Heart Power 4, emotional immunity, Superfit 4, immunity, beautiful redwood formula, Flower Formula 2, white rose for recovery of the journey of our lives. And interestingly enough, linden balance for crashed immune system. So that's one of our special care formulas. So that is a useful chart. Remember, if there's DNA mitral damage, you will need the correlation of those formulas in probably that order. Likewise, so for example, Moon asked me, what do we do if people cannot afford all 5 formulas? Well, then we would certainly use the top one, EDS 1, with Heart Power 1, with Superfit 1, if possible. You know, it's obviously better to use all 5. Likewise, if there's an emotional issue and it's purely and simply protection for yourself, then maybe Moss IV together with your relative, your constitutional Heart Power formula. It may not be Heart Power 4. It could be one of yours. It could be Heart Power 5 if you have an aortic constitution, Heart Power 3 if you have a pulmonary constitution, Heart Power 1 if you have a tricuspid constitution. Sorry, Heart Power 2. Yes, spiritual calm. So those are very, very important formulas.